So in lesson 19, we're going to talk about exponents, powers of negative numbers, roots, and evaluation of powers. So the first thing is exponents, which I know is you've all seen exponents throughout your elementary times, and also during middle school, you've all seen exponents. So when we talk about exponents, everybody's seen something like x to the fourth. And all x to the fourth means is x times x times x times x. So all we're doing is multiplying whatever x is 4 times. So take, for example, let's say we put 2 in here. All we're doing is multiplying 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. So in this case, 2 to the fourth power would be 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 2 is 16. So a common mistake that I see made is a lot of times when you say, oh, 2 to the fourth power, and what they do is, a lot of people do is they go multiply 2 times 4. And 2 times 4, as we know, is 8, and that wouldn't be the right answer. So remember, when you see powers, or in this case exponents, it means 2 to whatever power. That power means how many times we multiply the number by itself. So in this case, 2 to the fourth power is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the powers of negative numbers. And this is where a lot of you have had trouble with the whole concept of negative numbers and what's in parentheses, what's outside of parentheses, and trying to figure out how to answer those kind of things. So as you see here, we have 3 to the second, 3 to the third, 3 to the fourth, and then negative 3 to the fourth. So let's just go ahead and answer these real quick. 3 to the second is 9, and then 3 to the third is 27. 3 to the fourth is 81. The automatic assumption here, as we've talked about, is if we had a positive number or a even number of negatives, then we're going to get a positive. So you'd look at this and go, a lot of people are going to look at this and go, oh, it's negative 3. Well, since we do it 4 times, it's going to come out to a positive 81, just like we got in the previous number. But keep in mind, this negative is not inside parentheses. So that power is to the 3 and not to the negative. So since we see that, then we know what 3 to the fourth is obviously 81. And since we see the negative outside of that, we're automatically going to tack on that negative. So always make sure you pay attention. That's what's going to throw a lot of people off, is right here, is that negative outside. The power is to the 3 and not to the negative. Now, if we were to put parentheses around this, now the power would be to the negative and the 3. Then you would have negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3, which would give you the 81. But since we don't have the parentheses in here, then that power is directly just at the 3 and not at the negative. So let's try some examples here of powers of negative numbers. So once again, as I just talked about, since we have the negative inside the parentheses now with the 3, and the power outside of that, the power is going to be to the negative 3. So it's going to be negative 3 times the negative 3, which is going to give us 9. Same thing here. We'll have a negative 3 times the negative 3 times the negative 3. And this will go back to where we talked about if you had an odd number of negatives, it'll be negative. So you can see here, we know that since we have 3 negatives, we're going to get a negative number. And then 3 times 3 is 9, 9 times 3 is 27. So our answer would be negative 27. Now we have a negative 3 to the fourth power. And once again, we have an even number of negatives. Since the negative's inside the parentheses, the power is going to be going to the negative 3. We know that it's going to be a positive number. It's going to be 81. Now for D, this is where you got to be a little careful. We have the same thing here, except we have a negative sign on the outside. So we're wanting the opposite of negative 3 to the fourth power. So in this case, since we know that negative 3 to the fourth power is 81, we're going to go ahead and tack that negative sign onto it, and we're going to get negative 81 as our final answer. So keep in mind, see that since we got these in parentheses, the power is going to go to the number inside the parentheses. So in each of these cases, you're going to see what type of answers we're going to get. So let's go ahead and look at another example here. We have negative 3 to the third power minus a negative 3 in parentheses to the second power plus a negative 2 in parentheses to the second power. We got to be careful with our first term here. We see that that negative is not enclosed inside of parentheses, which means we're going to get 3 to the third power, which is 27. But we have to tack on our negative sign since it's outside since there isn't a parentheses. Then we have a negative 3 in parentheses squared, which is going to be 9, and then a plus our negative 2 in parentheses squared is going to be 4. So now we simply just go ahead and finish solving our problem. Negative 27 minus 9 is going to be negative 36 plus 4, and then negative 36 plus 4, where we go back to the right 4 spots in the number line. So our final answer is going to be negative 32. So since we've talked about exponents, what we're going to do is actually do the reverse of an exponent, which is a root. So if you remember correctly, 3 squared is going to equal 9. Okay? And all that simply is, so we go back and erase this, is 3 times 3, which equals 9. So now if we want to reverse that, we call that a root. So what we use is we use something called a radical sign. This is what a radical sign looks like. Maybe not necessarily this long, but overall this is what a radical sign looks like. It looks kind of like your division problem you might have seen in elementary school or maybe in junior high, but this is our radical sign. So if we were to take our 9 and put it back in here, basically what you're doing is what number multiplied by itself is going to give us 9. So we know that in this case 3 times 3 is 9. So the square root, we call this a square root. The square root of 9 is 3. And that's how we do square roots. Now, you can also do something like we had 3 to the third power, which we know is 3 times 3 times 3, which is 27. You can also have what's called positive cube roots. So in this case, we'd have 27, and L3 there. All this means is what number multiplied by itself 3 times is going to give us 27. And we know that answer is going to be 3. You can do the same thing with 3 to the fourth. It would be 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, which equals 81. Now, if you do the same thing to the square root of 81, which we obviously know is 9, but if they put a 4 here, they're asking for what number multiplied by itself 4 times is going to give us 81, and we know the answer is 3. So that's how we do square roots. You can use a calculator for most of these, but for the most part, this is how you find square roots. So let's look at some examples of roots then. So we have the square root of 64, the positive square root of 16, so that 4 there, so the fourth root of 16, and then the third root of negative 27, and then square root of 81 plus our negative, and we'll get to that here in a second. So what we're looking for here is what number multiplied by itself twice is going to give us 64. So we know that if we go through our multiplication facts, we know that 8 times 8 is 64. And so the square root of 64 is 8. Now, for letter B here, we're looking for what fourth root of 16 is going to be. So we're looking for what number multiplied by itself 4 times is going to give us 16. If you think clearly, 4 times 4 is 16, so we can't do that. But 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, and 8 times 2 is 16. So the fourth root of 16 is going to be 2. Now we're looking for the third root of negative 27. So what number multiplied by itself 3 times is going to give us negative 27? We know that 3 times 3 is 9, and 9 times 3 is 27. If we use a negative in there, negative 3 times negative 3 is 9, 9 times negative 3 is negative 27. So the third root of negative 27 is going to be negative 3. Now, for the square root of 81, we see that what number multiplied by itself twice is going to give us 81? Well, we know that 9 times 9 is 81, so 9. But then you see we have a negative sign outside of here, so that answer is going to have a negative. So always pay attention to where your negatives are. So in this case, since it's outside the square root, we're going to find the square root and then tack a negative on top of it. So the last part of this lesson, we're going to talk evaluation of powers. When we talked about evaluation before, remember it's just substitution. We're just substituting in whatever they give us for the variables into our problem. So in this case, we have y equals 3, so we're going to go ahead and put our 3 in. And as you can see, we're multiplying here. Then we're going to substitute in our x, which would be 4 squared. I'll talk about that here in a second. And m is 2 cubed. Now, as you see here, we're squaring whatever x is. So if x was negative 4, we're squaring negative 4. If it was a negative outside of this, if there was a negative here in this x here, then what would happen is you would actually be squaring x and then tacking a negative on top of it. So same thing with m. So let's go ahead and solve this. Now remember our order of operations. Don't multiply 3 times 4 and get 12 and then take the square of 12 and get 144. It's going to be the wrong answer. Make sure you do your order of operations. If you have to write PEMDAS at the top of your paper, write it. Do whatever you can to make sure you remember to do the exponents first. The parentheses, since we only have a number, we really can't do anything inside our parentheses. So the next thing we're going to do is our exponents. So 3 doesn't have an exponent. 4's got an exponent. So 4 times 2, or 4 times 4, excuse me, 4 times 4 is 16. And then 2 to the third power is going to be 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8. So we get 3 times 16 times 8. Now, when we multiply 3 times 16 times 8, we're going to come out to a final answer of 384. So just remember, when we're substituting in for our exponents, whatever our exponent is what we're going to substitute in for that variable. So in this case, we're squaring x. So in this case, x equals 4, we're squaring 4. We're cubing m, which means we're cubing 2. Okay, so make sure you follow along to it. If there's any negatives or anything like that, make sure you either ask questions or understand what that negative is. If you're unsure, ask a question. Make sure that you get some help.